Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being part of today's Zoom Q&A meeting. We're looking at lesson number 8, and we're going to be taking a look at the plant system design. So thank you, Sarah, for being part of the meeting here. And what I think we'll do is just do a quick overview of our upcoming lesson. And then I've got a couple things to show you. So that's what I think that's what we will do first of all. Just get my ducks in a row here so I can see my screen. There we are. All right. Yeah, so lesson number 8 is pretty straightforward, and I'll have to start out by saying when you finish the course and you're wanting to design for others, you would typically not do a lesson 8 before you had finished your concept plan. So that's one of the things you want to keep in mind is the details. These planting details are most often done after you have the overall concept. So the course is actually going to get shifted, I believe, after some requests for kind of restructuring the last 3 lessons here. So that'll be exciting in for future courses. But so today we're kind of looking at a detail before we have that big picture completed. And one of the details we're looking at is plant system design. So the core of the lesson here is divided into 2 different parts. We have the local plant survey, which is it's pretty straightforward. And then we have the plant system design, which is trickier. And I would say, in my experience, this is the one piece of land design that takes probably the most amount of time to learn. And it's not like you stop learning this either. It's and the reason for that, I think, is that we'll have some ideas about what plants we want to assemble together, and we will do that. And then traditionally, you might have to wait, a year or maybe 2 to see how they are interacting and whether they are, providing you with what you felt was a good end result. And then you probably make some changes for the next time you do this. So I've been playing in the landscape industry over 40 years, and I'm very comfortable with this part of the whole process. But it honestly, it probably took me, I don't know, 15 or 20 years of repeated work to get to a really comfortable place with this. So I used to like now I can go ahead and do a planting plan on paper like we're asking you to do here. Whereas before I had to sort of do all this on site. I had to have the plants on site and just kind of make it all happen based on observations there rather than on a computer or in front of a drawing. So yeah, so if you find this is challenging and difficult, know that I would expect that. Again, it's getting to know all your plants that work in your area and that you like to work with, whether they be edibles, medicinals, ornamentals. I kind of like mixing all of them. So yeah, we're going to take a look at that, and I'll give you a short example here of how I approach it. And yeah, we'll go from there. So the local plant survey again is really straightforward. If I open up, let me just find the template file. There we go. Move along to the end. So there we are. So yeah, the local plant survey again is pretty straightforward, and we are looking for medicinal plants here, and that doesn't necessarily play into the next part of the assignment. We're not asking you to assemble a landscape full of medicinals. You may want to include them and you may not, and so not to worry there. You don't have to do that. You don't have to use the plants within your lists here, but yeah, this is pretty straightforward. List of plants, some traditional seasonal foods, which are super interesting to go through. And then where some of the local nurseries are and farms, and then a SWOT analysis at the end here. So again, that I think is pretty straightforward. The tricky part of this lesson is the next part where we're looking at the plant system design. And again, you wouldn't normally do this at this stage in the design process, but this gives us a little bit of a warm up to the next two lessons where we're actually getting into designing now rather than site analysis. So if we take a look at the slide, we're looking at the first slide here is we're looking at existing conditions. And again, that's obviously your base map. And then these are important steps to consider. You know, what is the whole purpose that you're trying to achieve here with this planting? And you have three goals you can take a look at there. So it could be anything. This may be just increasing habitat. It might be increasing your food resilience. It may be just creating more diversity, building soil through that. So all kinds of different potential reasons for that. And we want to see your proposed plan. Now, the one thing I would recommend everybody consider is we aren't asking for you to do a detailed planting plan of your whole project site. So what I suggest you do is just take a very small section of that and work on that. So that may just be a very small bed. It may just have, you know, a couple of trees and a shrub or two and some underplanting. It doesn't really matter how big it is. What I really look for personally is just how these various layers get applied to the planting design. So that's something that was imprinted into me very, very early in my career, was the use of various layers. So we have, you know, trees. Well, we have a couple of different tree canopies. You have very tall trees. You have that kind of understory, you have shrubs, you have herbaceous plants, you have ground covers, you have climbers, you have tubers. There's, you know, again, various different layers within the landscape. And I've found that if we take advantage of those layers, the landscape looks a lot more natural, right? Because this is part of the challenge is assembling some plantings that look like they belong in a given project site. And that's easier said than done. But with practice, right? And it's all very subjective because it's based on how you perceive it. But yeah, I would recommend you just take a small section of your overall landscape and work on that. So, because this can be quite demanding, especially if this is a new process for you. Let me just jump to Javin Bernakovich and myself put on this course a little earlier in the spring, and it's aesthetic design for ecological landscapes. And I'm just going to show you one small section of it, where the part of the fifth session that we did, where we are looking at planting plans and assembling plants. So I'll just basically run through how I would approach it. And I'm not really looking at specific plants. I'm looking at plant types. So the specific plants are something that take years of, of research and getting to know what works in your area, what works in the context of the project site you're working on. But let's take a peek at this. Here we go. So this was a project that we did, and this area that you're looking at is a new planting area that was not existing on the project site. And then you can see we've got a little pathway through here, and then another small planting area here. And there's other areas of the landscape, but we're just focused on this one for now. And this is quite large. It's about 1,500 square feet. So you don't have to, it would be absolutely fine for you to do something that's 500 square feet or even less. So again, the size of it isn't that critical. It's sort of how you view it in terms of these different layers and what you're trying to achieve. So on the right here, you can see sort of step one. So step one for myself is placing the largest woody plants. And just to give you a little context, in this situation, we have a backdrop here. These are grayed out. These are, second growth Douglas fir, so they're probably 100 plus feet high. And this planting in front of them is really just going to help bring the whole landscape down. And then there's some new parking area here for the residents. Happens to be a permeable parking area, that doesn't matter. But we have, as you can see, we have a lot of edge, right? And actually we have an edge along the back here. So we'll get to that. But first thing is laying out the trees. So we are using a small canopy tree here that's going to fit nicely. It's going to max out at about 15, 20 feet, no more. And what I suggest, and again, this is very much more of a personal approach, but in this case, we want to try and unify the landscape. So if I'm putting 3 trees in and I put 3 different species in here, it's really it may almost be an unsettled landscape. It may appear that way in your eye. So what we've done here is we're doing 3 of the same plants, right? So we're going to still have lots of variety in this landscape, and there are planting areas elsewhere. But for this bed, we want to unify it. So we're going with similar trees. And when I place these symbols on the drawing, I'm trying to visualize what the mature tree is going to look like and how large it's going to be. So these symbols represent, a decade or more old tree. So they're going to give me a fairly decent idea of whether they're going to be touching, which I don't mind if these end up getting a bit bigger and they're overlapping a little. That's fine. If you didn't want that, you'd have to provide them a little bit more space. So that's something else I consider, is whether I want them to sort of blend or to be very much unique. So here we're kind of in the middle. I definitely think that they will eventually touch. It's going to take a few years to get there though. So that's step number one. So that is the main tree planting for this area. Now, in your situation, you may have existing plant material. You may have existing trees already. So maybe you have one, and then you want to add a couple more. If you're in a large planting area like this, then from my perspective, 3 is a good number. I don't like using even numbers, so we go with odd. So it's either going to be 1, 3, 5. Once you get to a certain point, it doesn't matter, but with the low numbers, it does. And then we go to our next step here where we're looking at large shrubs. So here we have our trees, and in this case, it might be difficult to see, but we've grayed those out. And we are just putting in large shrub material. And because this bed has 2 sides to it, we're really gearing, most of the viewing is going to be coming from here or from here, and not so much at the back, although what you don't see here is there's a driveway, and as people drive up, they are gonna, so there is a purpose, or there is some advantage of putting large material at the back here as part of the backdrop. And basically we're trying to plug holes that one could see through. So, and fill the bed up. So if I put a large shrub here, that's going to, as you can see, even with just the trees and the shrubs shown here, if we look at that, that's over 50% of the bed is filled already. So that's good as far as costing goes. So again, we want to visualize how large these are going to get. Obviously, this type of shrub is larger than this. These guys are going in the front, so we can get a slightly better view of them. And the ones in the back are just, again, they're a backdrop, so they don't have to be stunning in terms of their appearance. And yeah, so that is step number 2. So we, again, have about half of the bed filled up, and we are on to our next layer. And in this case, that would be large herbaceous plants. And if we look at the bottom here, we can see some of those have been grayed out, right? The trees and shrubs have been grayed out, and we're showing all of our newly introduced plants. And again, what they are is really not important. It's more what we're, that is important, but in this class, it's, a little less important. And certainly with this example, it is. So we are plugging holes here. So you'll see what happens when you put together trees and shrubs and go back. You invariably, because we don't want to be pruning. That's one thing we want to avoid, is pruning woody plants. We're going to space these so they can just do their thing and never have to be pruned if we don't want to do that. But what happens is, you can see, we end up with some awkward spaces here that are quite large, right? And if we have large open spaces, that's going to mean we have evaporation, we have opportunity for weeds. So the one thing we want to make sure of is that we are controlling the ground. And to do that, we'll be intentionally planting it. So in this example, we are clumping some tall herbaceous plants at the back here. And these particular ones do quite well when they are grouped. So we're gonna group these together to make them look like they're just one big clump. And I like doing that with certain plants. But if we are able to do this, then we pretty much have the middle of this planting area dealt with. And now when I say dealt with, I mean we're controlling the ground, and visually we have a lot of different different elevations happening already. Then we go to the front of the tree canopy, and we have done the same thing here. So we are grouping various plants. So we've done 3 groups of this, and you'll see we've got a group of 7 and then 3 and 3. And with this type of plant, the red symbol here, we're doing groups of 5 and 3, but mainly 5, right? So what I've found in my journey, landscape journey, is that trying to create some randomness is really important for it to look like as natural as possible, right? And then again, we have some more groupings here. So if we were putting individuals in here instead of groups, you would find that that part of the bed would be a lot of work. Because what happens is with herbaceous plants is some are going to do better than others, and they're going to interface, right? So they're going to collide a little bit over time. And if you have groupings, they're going to fare much better than they would normally. So it's hard to predict how well things are going to do over the long haul, but we pretty much know what to expect. And with this part of the layer, you can see that we've done 80-90% of the bed. We're already set up, but we have this huge edge to deal with here, and that is actually one of the biggest challenges that one can have is we're going to fill part of that with mid-size herbaceous plants. So we're again bringing these mid-size plants to the edge, and some are in groups, and there's the odd individual, and it really does depend on what these are. Okay, and then as you can see, we still have some space, right? So there's this space here, and we can just go through all of this and find little pockets. So that will bring us to our next and final layer of planting, which is really those edgers and that smaller layer. And then we're done, right? So with that edge, you can see I've even tried to plug the edge on the back, just the way this bed is, because it can be viewed from behind. I thought this was important. And then we have some along this front edge. So again, there's the odd individual, there's some groups, and that's what we end up with. Now, we can take this, and when we'd installed this landscape, and when we're on site, well, we end up with this planting plan that gives us a breakdown of what's here, right? All the different plants that we've got. Invariably, we will end up having to substitute, and in this case, we did have to substitute a lot of plants that were not available, even though they were available at the time of the design. That changes quite a bit. And but even if we were able to get all these and we went to do the planting, when we're laying all of this out, we would, we made slight changes. We have a design to follow, but we're doing what is more site specific when we're doing the planting itself. So this would be slightly different than was actually planted. Not significantly, but just a little bit. So that is a little bit about what we do here. I'm not sure. See, here's an example. Here's that example right after planting. And this is a very full planting plan, but the moment it's planted, you can see there's still quite a bit of space in here. But if you fast forward a year, that changes dramatically. So yeah, so that's a little bit about how we go about planting. Let me just stop share here and show you a couple of other things. Sorry, I should have had the images up here, but there we go. Yeah, here's a landscape we did about 23 years ago. I think, no, 204. So 20 years ago. Well, the picture was taken 20 years ago. This would be about a year and a half after planting. And this is kind of where I was going when we look at layers. So there was nothing here before. This backdrop was here, and this is an organic farm, and they have sloping fields behind this planting area, which this is part of probably a 2-acre or 3-acre. It's almost like a park setting with lots of interesting features I can show you. But we're looking at the planting here. So we brought these maples in here. So we repeated the same tree through this landscape in this bed. And you can barely see these tall shrubs. So there's a few of those, hard to see in the middle of the summer. And then we go down in size. Now we have a bunch of ornamental grasses here. And we use those because we're trying to pick up the sort of wildness of the landscape that's beyond. This organic farm has a lot of pasture, and these ornamental grasses, which there are a lot. So there's some here, there's some here, there's some here. So that's really heavy on the grass, even though there's still lots of color, but there's lots of repetition. So with this plant, it's here, 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 and here, and one there. So we've repeated it along this pathway. There's a couple of interesting kind of spiky items that got repeated here. This is a Lysomachia. And that's one of the things we like to do in our landscapes is repeat similar plants through the whole landscape to try and unify it. So it makes it all pull together. So you can have very distinct areas, but you can have it all feel like it's part of one if some of this material gets repeated. And yeah, this is definitely, it was a fun job, took a few years to do. There was lots of hardscape and some water features. Let me see. There was a big wall built. It's just and enormous plantings here. There were, yeah. So this was on standing on top of a wall, looking at this pond, and they have a beautiful barn up here. And again, all these trees here were planted and provide some structure, and they go with, there's a beautiful, it was either a pear or an apple that was here. There's some lovely existing plants that we worked around, not too many, but there were some that gave the landscape. So you can get a very full, mature looking landscape in a short time. Part of that was using good soil, as good as we could get when we're importing it, as well as finishing the planting with a high quality compost. All right, so that is a little bit let me show you something else here that's entirely different. Because again, it's really context based. So that was an organic farm. We can come in and take a look at a small urban project here where we had to we had these wooden retaining walls that were failing, and this concrete that was cracking, that our clients wanted to make a change here. And you can see one of the telling parts of this is the slope heading towards the house, and the house is right down here. So that was something we wanted to be very mindful of. So we got in there and demoed it, which was, I don't think I have these in proper order here, but yeah, we took out all of the walls and the concrete. Not sure where those pictures have gone to. But that was a large job, the demo. And then we brought in a mason to do an Allen block wall. It just made sense. It's pre-engineered, and yeah, they did a very nice job with this. Now, one interesting part of this is we've worked with this mason for years, and one of his guys made a mistake. And just before Christmas, we got a call. I'll try and find the picture here. Sorry, I'm scrolling like crazy, but there was a mistake done with the retaining wall drainage. So this area flooded during a high rain. There we go. During a high rainfall event, and we were taking a break just before Christmas and got a call that this was phase one, so there's no plantings yet. But yeah, there was some serious challenges with the water, and that got rectified. But it was it wasn't fun to see that, and our clients weren't too happy. But it was actually a good thing that we saw this prior to any of the planting. Well, there you go. There's some of the demo. So it was a big job getting all that out. And but in the end, what we ended up doing, because the drainage got rectified, and then we put a little drain under these beds below the patio grade, so that if there was excess buildup, water started coming up during the winter, it would have somewhere to go. And then we just built these little planters instead of having it at grade. Makes the wall look a little less imposing. And yeah, that was how it finished off after it was planted. And where are some other pictures of it? Turned out to be, it's a lovely little garden. Our clients like it, and it is, there's some of the nasty demolition. Yeah, there's a lot of work. Okay. Just looking for some after images. Yeah, it filled in really nice. So that's a year later. And these are quite narrow, these beds, but this is a mixture of edible, medicinal, and ornamental, and it's all deer resistant. But no, very happy with this. And then they have a little enclosed planting veggie garden in the back here. So, and then we did the front as well. Front, we ended up scraping this turf off, and then we reapplied it. So once we had a bit of retaining at the bottom here, we took the turf and reapplied it, and then it's not shown here, but we go and we flip it upside down, so there's no opportunity for the grass to survive. And then we ended up putting topsoil back on, and we do it in such a way that we use these slinger trucks, and of course there's irrigation all in place. So once the topsoil goes down, it's we're in good shape and ready to plant. We did a little rain garden here, so that's just an overview of more of an urban, and some cranberry here. We grow lots of cranberry maritima. And yeah, and this is a good example of the spacing that we would use at time of planting. And you'd think, oh gosh, there's tons of room there. Well, we're visualizing what these plants are going to look like. And then a little later in the year, we have a pretty kind of wild filled planting here. We got cardoon and some grasses and a few herbs in here, but it's mainly get these tall grasses at the top, so our clients can sit out front here, and these will provide a little bit of privacy for them. Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing the chat there. So Sarah, do you fill with annuals? No, we don't. No. It's funny, I started out with my career. I worked for the Vancouver Park System in BC here and took my apprenticeship through them, and a lot of the work there was annuals and bulbs. And I went to Windsor Great Park in England for a year and a half, 2 years, and they were it's enormous landscape there, and worked in Savile Gardens, which is it's a formal herbaceous garden. Part of it is, and I got really excited about herbaceous perennials. So that's basically all we use: the tree, shrub, perennial, climbers, ground covers. Never put annuals in. So there's just no need for the infill. I understand the concept, but we can get really quick response from our plantings. Like this is the first year, and it's the trick here is that after, well, it's having irrigation in place, so the water is a huge part of establishment, but it's also we've imported some soil, we reused some of the existing turf, right? So we have soil life, and then that added compost after planting, that is the ticket. Do you ever thin out the grasses? Absolutely. these are very much dynamic, and that's the downside of this sort of a landscape is it needs to have some intervention once a year, not after the first year or anything, probably in 3 years. You need to be able to go in and foresee what's going to happen. Say in February or March, you take a look at how things are doing as they're emerging and make your adjustments there. It might be dividing grasses, it might be extracting some of them. Really depends on what the client is trying to achieve with the overall landscape. And but these change all the time. So this picture would look completely different now. I haven't been back to this landscape this year. I'd certainly like to. It's just I haven't had an opportunity with all our responsibilities this year. So yeah, it's a very different way of approaching the landscape, and it's the sort of thing that we're able to do after having a lot of years behind us, right? Getting to know all of these plants that we're working with and what their expectations are. And I love the whole dynamic piece to it. So, but you need to do some follow-up. And I've been to a few landscapes. When we did, I went to visit it 2 decades later, and the person looking after it had a different vision. So if you're maintaining what you design and plant, then you're in a good spot that way. We didn't have a large enough crew to be able to do that. We're very much hands-on. I want to be on these projects as they're going in. So that has there's another, that's a year and a half later, so that's settling in nicely. And yeah, cute little area. And this is the rain garden that's settling in. It's done quite well. And then you'll see in this photo and the last one, whoops. And this one here, we don't like traditional lawn. Well, I shouldn't say that. They have their place. We like to put something in different. So this is a bee mix that has a lot of clover and some achillea. It's got all kinds of different blends in the mix. So it still needs to be cut, but it is more supportive than regular turf grass. So that's one we get from West Coast Seeds here in British Columbia. But it's very common to find these sort of seed mixes that are pollinator friendly. Yeah, so that is about it for sharing that stuff. Sarah, do you have any questions or anything you'd like to go over while we have a few minutes here?
How do you feel about like espalier style trees as far as like your initial tree grouping? Because I'm gonna do a design on the side yard where I want to put my orchard, and I was planning on incorporating espalier fruit trees as kind of like a fence barrier between us and the
nice idea. Yeah.
And so like the grouping, so it's kind of like a fence line. So it's not going to have that grouping. It'll be a espalier tree. And then I was going to use lavender and clematis and jasmine and everything like that around it.
Nice. Yeah. It's all to context. So if we were looking at, what would the width of the planting area be approximately?
About 10 feet.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So
and then behind it, I want to have a hedge of huckleberries and blueberries.
Oh, nice.
So huckleberries, blueberries, then an espaliered fruit tree. And then in front of it, I was thinking about doing a ton of garlic and onions as my spring planting. I'm thinking, can I put enough onions and garlic to kind of create that barrier between the rabbits and all of the things that are coming into the property. I don't know if they'll just run over the top of it or go around
Probably.
it. You know,
Yeah, probably,
trying to
but
use the onions and garlic as some kind of barrier
mhm.
between the wildlife.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there are a lot,
the boxwoods are also very similar too. Like if you use boxwoods to try to keep your gardens in, it's supposed to help keep
right?
the rabbits and everything out, but I don't know. It's all an experiment.
Yeah, I've only used boxwood once. It's funny because I have I'll show you a picture. It's creates a very uh different look, of course. It's formalizes it a little
But I
because it's
have
quite
boxwood growing wild on the property. So I'm like, if I can use some of
hmm,
that to transplant, without increasing the cost, that'd be great.
there we go. I'll just get that picture I'm thinking of. There we are.
And then of course the area where I want to put all the fruit trees is the worst soil I have on the property. So hubby and I have a lot of compost work to do and building up before we can actually start planting trees. I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, be careful of a lot of times like prep is everything, as you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
So it's best to do all you can on that end, and often we'll broad fork and make sure we have some some soil life in there. This image I'm showing you is one where our client, this a big retaining wall that we did, and naturalistic planting up top here. It's a beautiful landscape. It's um, in terms of landscape elements, this wall is it was a necessity because of this slumping hillside here, but our client wanted to define this edge, so we put in boxwood here, and you can see what it does. It really does well. It provides the edge. It's quite. It gives it a little bit of formality. That's the only time I've ever used it, and I guess I grew up around it, and I'm not as it see for a plant to hit our checklist or planting palette, for it to get into there, I want it to have good foliage. Like if it doesn't have good foliage, then it's got to provide something, maybe flower or fruit, or there has to be an attribute there to carry it. And I guess that's my problem when I look at boxwood. This could be December and it could be July, and it looks the same basically, right? And
Yeah.
that can be a really good thing for sure. It really depends on what you're trying to pull off, and
Yeah, the
we
only benefit I've heard of boxwood is to keep pests out. And I was like, oh, so is this why Europe went that way, where they were boxing all of their gardens out, was to try to keep the rabbits and vermin out from eating their goods. But so there was like a boxwood, then garlic and onions, and then your crops. Right. So I was like two layers
yeah,
to try to deter the animals from coming in.
right.
But I haven't done it in practice, so I'm not sure how
You
how
can
effective it actually is.
you can try Nepeta as well. I don't know if you've used that at all.
Oh, what is
Um,
that?
Here, I'll probably I should be able to just go back to that picture. It's probably in there. Yeah, it is there. It's just not going to be easy to. Let me see if I can get a.
Well, this year we did wildflowers in the front yard, like overseeded like crazy. And so the rabbits are just hanging out there. They're not coming into anything in the backyard where fruits and veggies are.
Hmm, well, that's good.
Yeah.
So this is another a good little edger. This is a salvia,
Oh, I love salvia.
but there's an Nepeta right in here that you can barely see. It's an edger,
Okay.
and it flowers basically the whole summer. You can cut it back a little bit in midsummer and get another flush out of
Oh, it's
it.
catmint.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Oh yeah, I
So
have this. I love catmint. It's one of my favorites.
it's quite a trooper. Yeah.
Oh, it is. And it smells good and the bees love
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So the boxwood just doesn't hit enough of the beneficial elements for you to want to put it in the landscape.
That's just my personal.
My hubby's the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
He doesn't
Yeah,
want it in there.
it's just kind of
Things to maintain more.
yeah. It depends on what choices you have.
Oh yeah.
And generally if we're starting a landscape from scratch, it wouldn't hit the, even if somebody said, oh, I want an evergreen hedge, let's say.
Yeah.
Well, it makes a nice hedge. Like we had one where I grew up, it was about 8 feet high. It was beautiful. But it's yeah, I could just find better. Like I would rather have a Portuguese laurel hedge than a boxwood hedge. And that's because it flowers and has beautiful So
Use salal a lot. Is that how you say it? The SAL?
Salal, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
So
beautiful plant.
I don't know why Oregonians don't talk about it more.
Mm,
We're all about huckleberries and blueberries, raspberries and blackberries out here, but it feels like a plant that should really be incorporated more into our edges.
yeah, yeah,
Have you had
yeah.
the berries? Have you had the berries before? Because I've never
Oh
had
yeah.
them.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, we have it on our property. So we like nibbling on those. Probably for native edibles, I would say thimbleberry, probably the most favorite
We
of
have
ours.
that growing in our front yard.
Yeah, it's
Wild.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I love native plants. I think ocean spray. So that is a native that's really underutilized. It's a very durable. It's almost a pioneer plant, I believe. It can take a lot of abuse, but oh, there's some beautiful native plants. Some are really tough, and others need really specific conditions to do well, like Mahonia nervosa. It's that small Mahonia, and
Yeah.
it needs to be sort of cordled a little bit in a nice shady spot versus aquifolium that can take a lot more sun. But yeah, no, we have some beautiful natives. There's no doubt of that. So
Yeah, I've stayed clear of the grasses because of I mean, in Oregon, it's just they go crazy so fast. And to try to get them out is like it's
uh
challenging. They're so resistant.
yeah.
Uh, so but I
Hmm.
am trying to go that way because I know the benefit there.
Hmm.
Uh okay, so a question about like fall care with these herbaceous perennials.
Yeah.
So people tend to go to a tidy garden, but it's
Hmm.
better for the insects and pests to keep them going. So
Right.
what is your strategy for like, do you do a quick cut so there's open stems so the birds or so the insects can plant in the hollow stems, or like what's
No,
your
I would for my own landscape, we wouldn't touch anything till we get warmer temperatures in the spring. So all winter you have this structure up
Mhm.
that we're getting a lot of wintering beneficials and not, you have to have a mix.
Yeah.
Create this habitat during the growing season and leave it over the winter, and then go and cut down items in the spring, and then apply compost or do whatever you're doing, and then you're good for another year. That's our sort of workflow, is we intervene early in the spring, and but we don't I've had clients before early on in my career that wanted to have things cut down and cleaned up in the fall, but back then it was like, oh yeah, sure, I can use the work, and that's great, but I wouldn't recommend it now. It just takes away opportunity
So how does
for
chop and drop work? Because that's another thing that I'm like, I don't want to add a bunch of mold and mildew into my areas either. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't know if that's just because I have a lack of minerals in my soil to be able to compost it properly. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of unsure of when you go chop and drop and just let it hang out, or when you need to put it in the compost.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. One thing that I've noticed on our property, um, when we first got here, we've been here 28 years, and when in our early years, we were creating everywhere, expanding the plantings, and then our business sort of overtook our lives, and we found that we just couldn't look after some of these areas, so they were basically abandoned.
Mhm.
And we have some old plantings that we haven't touched for years. So when we went back to renovate them, it was quite quite a pleasant surprise to see how much the soil had improved with a lack of intervention. So the
Yeah.
more material that you can allow to cycle,
Hmm.
the better it is. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but early in the spring, if we cut down material and it was, you can't do it for everything, but you can compost right over it, right? You could mulch right over it if it's not too bulky. Um, but chop and drop, you want to be careful. You don't want to do it. You wouldn't want to do it right now,
Right.
because the material would just burn off. Really, you want it to have some soil moisture and to be able to break down properly. So I do it on a small scale.
Okay.
Um, on a larger scale, I would be still, I mean, the whole concept of having this landscape flush with growth, and then if you tidy it up in the spring, is to add more compost or more material to make up what you've taken away. So I think as long as you're doing that, and for clients that want their landscapes looking beautiful, they don't want to have old material sitting on the ground
Right.
traditionally.
Right.
So we're just careful that if things get cut down, boom, you've got some nice compost to go on top of the soil afterwards. Again, I do it kind of in a smaller scale at home here, but our focus now, it used to be more aesthetic, years ago, and now it's more food production. So yeah, we're just trying to build soil constantly with that, and we do no-till, and we're adding compost every year, so I don't take out any roots that I don't have to. We're just cutting things down to the ground and then mulching on top of them. So in a lot of ways, we do that with the ornamentals too, and it's simpler. But chop and drop, in theory, if you're doing it in the damper time of year, can work really well. But if you also look at it longer term, let's say instead of cutting your material down in the fall, you leave it up all winter, and then you cut it and leave it on the ground. You're kind of giving the insects a little better opportunity to make it through the winter. So I don't really think there's a right or wrong. It's just what works for your context. If you have clients you're trying to keep happy, but you're wanting to build soil for them, um, as long as that material is getting composted, I don't think it really matters
Yeah.
where, as long as it's getting reapplied. But I've also found that no matter what landscape I'm in, I can't generate enough compost. We have
I
to
can.
bring in,
Yeah.
we have to bring it in every year, and we have our own chipper, we have all kinds of things, but we can't like, we can't keep up. So yeah,
Yeah, that's how I'm feeling
that's the
too.
tricky part.
So what about like comfrey and those other plants that are
Oh yeah.
just like
Yeah.
super amazing, nutrient dense? Are your
Yeah.
clients willing to put those kind of things into their beds?
Yeah, I use those for underplanting trees, and I have a lot in our landscape, and I do cut those back
Yeah.
probably about a month ago. So right after they finish up their first flush,
Uh-huh.
I have no trouble cutting those down and then either leaving the foliage on the ground or composting it. They are fantastic. They're such a good support plant for bees that yeah, I really enjoy them. So, but I'm gonna have to cut our meeting off now.
Okay, thanks.
Is there anything, one other question I can
No,
answer
that's
for you
that's pretty
before we
much it.
go?
This is
Okay.
just such a fun week to study plants. I love
Oh
it.
yeah. Well, that's what got me into the business. I spent about a decade just totally focused on learning as many plants as I could, and then you know, not just learning the plant themselves, but you know, their cultural requirements. And yeah, it's a lot of fun, and you never stop learning. There's always something new out there. So
Yep. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for joining me today, and yeah, I look forward to seeing your assignment next week.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, you take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.